Back in 2017, two cousins opened a small cookie shop in Logan, Utah. And nothing about it looked like it was going to become a national franchise. It was a college town, a storefront. They had an awesome recipe that they kept refining through trial and error, but then it hit social media. Within a matter of weeks, that little cookie shop gained over 1 million followers online, and within a year, it had 100 locations. But a year after that, it had nearly 300. And today, that brand Crumble has more than 1,000 stores across the country. Now picture being one of the founders in the middle of that. The product's working, the demand is real, and somehow, in between running the actual business, you're supposed to be fielding hundreds of phone calls, emails, and applications from people who want to open a location of their own. And that is the exact moment when a term like FSO starts showing up in conversations, a franchise sales organization. Most founders have heard the term, but far fewer could actually tell you what it means, what it does, or why brands bring one in. So that is what we're covering today. What is an FSO? What does it do? Why do franchisors turn to one? And what on a day-to-day basis does that relationship look like? And most importantly, what is the benefit for a growing brand? So let's start with the simple version. FSO stands for Franchise Sales Organization. At its core, a franchise sales organization helps bring consistency and structure to franchise development or the franchise sales process as a brand grows. Now that's the on-paper definition, but a definition only tells you so much. So let's actually unpack what that means in practice. Franchise development, it's the umbrella term for everything involved in growing a brand through franchisees. So that's attracting candidates, qualifying them, guiding them through the process, and eventually awarding a franchise. That is a full discipline on its own, and it requires its own tools, timelines, skill set, and expectation setting. An FSO, it's the function, and often the team, that owns that discipline for a brand. Now to be clear, an FSO specifically refers to an outside organization, a company a franchisor brings in to run development on their behalf. Some franchisors, they take a different route and they keep that function in-house instead, often with their own franchise development director or coach leading the process, and sometimes it's supported by an outside firm's coaching and systems. Now that in-house setup is not technically an FSO, but it is solving some of the same underlying problems, making sure franchise development runs as a structured, consistent process instead of falling entirely on the founder. It also helps to know what an FSO is not. It is not the same thing as a franchise broker or a consultant. A broker is typically a referral source, someone with a network of prospective buyers who connects a candidate to a brand and then steps out of the process. An FSO does something much broader. It manages the entire pipeline, whether a candidate came from a broker, a web form, a trade show, a referral, and then it runs that candidate through a consistent process from first conversation to signed agreement, while, and this is important, while also integrating the franchisor into the approval process of new franchisees. Concretely, that process usually includes things like fielding and qualifying inbound interest, scheduling and running discovery calls, coordinating a discovery day where a candidate visits the brand in person, managing all the paperwork and legalese and the timeline tied to the franchise disclosure document, and keeping every candidate's status organized so nothing falls through the cracks. And none of that requires convincing anyone of anything. It requires a system and someone responsible for running it. So when you hear FSO, think about it less of a sales team and more as the operating system for franchise development, or the structure that turns interest into an organized, repeatable process. To understand why that matters, it helps to understand the exact moment in a brand's life cycle when founders start looking for one, and it rarely is at the very beginning. Most people get into franchising because they have already proven something works. They built a business, they refined the model, and they had it running well in multiple locations, multiple cities, and at some point, a natural question comes up: how do we grow beyond this? What is our next strategy? And there really are several ways to answer that, but there are two that are the most common. One option is just strictly opening more corporate locations without any other expansion strategies in mind. That works, but it does typically require more capital, more management layers, and more day-to-day oversight for every single site that the founder owns. The other path, of course, is franchising, letting independent business owners invest in and operate new locations while following the systems that already worked within the original business. Franchising sounds straightforward in theory, but in practice, once a brand becomes an official franchise opportunity with proof of concept and validation, interest tends to build quickly and people start reaching out. Founders themselves, they find themselves fielding questions about investment costs, available territories, training, and trying to help people understand what day-to-day ownership actually looks like. And what starts as a handful of conversations snowballs rapidly into dozens of calls, emails, follow-ups, on top of having to still run the business that made people interested in the first place. That's usually the moment a franchise sales organization enters the conversation. And that's not because the founder isn't capable. They clearly are. They built the business. It's because franchise development is its own full-time discipline with its own workflow, timing, and follow-up requirements. A well-performing FSO helps free up the founders to focus on what matters, successfully opening and supporting new franchise locations. And transparently, most founders didn't start their business because they wanted to spend every week managing a sales pipeline. It also tends to happen right around the time growth gets more complex in other ways as well. You've got new markets opening in different states, which means different registrations, different territory maps, and different timelines for different candidates, all moving at once. None of that is a problem to be worried about, of course. It's usually a good sign. That's because it means the brand is doing something right and they have enough people that have noticed. But it does mean the process benefits from having a dedicated structure instead of it being handled in the margins of an already full schedule. Here's what a lot of people get wrong. The most common misconception about an FSO is that its main job is selling franchises. And that's just not the full picture. Think about what actually piles up as interest in a brand grows, and it's a lot. A rising number of people interested in the opportunity, questions about costs, training, territories, daily operations, candidates who need several conversations before they're ready to make a confident decision, opportunities to connect a prospective owner with an existing franchisee who can speak honestly about their experience, a growing number of calls, emails, and meetings happening at the same time, and different candidates at completely different stages of the process, and a lot of important details that need to live somewhere more reliable than a spreadsheet or a sticky note. A franchise sales organization exists to bring order to all of that. It's less about persuading somebody and more about managing a structured process so that conversations that need to keep happening actually keep happening consistently, and the founder isn't the only person holding the entire process in their head. There's a benefit on the other side of that equation too. A more structured process, it means a better experience for the prospective franchise owner as well. These are sophisticated individuals that need clear answers, a defined timeline, and a real understanding of what ownership involves before anyone signs anything. Part of that structure always includes prospective franchisees connecting directly with several franchise owners who already run one or many of the brand's locations. And that kind of conversation, often called validation, it matters more to a candidate than almost anything else in the process. And that's because it's one thing to hear about a business from the founder who built it. It's another thing entirely to hear about it from someone living in the day-to-day reality of running it. A well-run FSO helps facilitate those connections naturally at the right point in the process instead of leaving candidates to track that information down all on their own. Once you start looking into franchise sales organizations, you will realize very quickly that they don't all operate the same way. And that makes sense because not every franchisor wants the same level of involvement in their own development process, nor is it always necessary. Some founders want a team that can take on a much larger share of the franchise development, essentially a fully outsourced approach, ran by people who do this full time. Now, other founders, they want to keep franchise development in-house, but they still need coaching, training, and to understand the systems that need to exist behind their own team so they can run a structured process without having to build it from scratch. At Franchise FastLane, we are a franchise sales organization ourselves. And since 2017, we have worked alongside emerging franchise brands as they have expanded into new markets, awarded new franchisees, and built the systems to support long-term growth. And we've built two very different programs because one size doesn't fit every brand. FastLane is our fully outsourced franchise development program designed for brands that want experienced professionals and proven systems handling the process from start to finish. CarPool is very intentionally built different. It is for founders who want to stay in the driver's seat, keeping franchise development in-house while plugging into coaching, training, and back-end support that strengthens how they run it. Neither approach is better than the other. They simply serve different founders at different stages in their franchisor life cycle. And depending on how much of that process a brand wants to own directly versus hand to a dedicated team, defines which program is better for them here at the FastLane. Now here's something that might surprise you. A good FSO isn't picking up every brand that comes along. Every year, franchise sales organizations evaluate a large number of franchise opportunities, and only a fraction of them actually become long-term partners. No different than how you want to treat your prospective franchisees. That selectivity exists for a real reason. A responsible FSO looks closely at things like brand health, operational performance, growth trends, category, how involved leadership actually is day to day, and whether the franchisor can support the franchisees already operating in the system today and well beyond the amount of growth that they're currently experiencing. Now, why does that matter so much? Because a successful franchise sale doesn't start the moment someone signs an agreement. It starts long before that, with the franchise system that is already investing in its franchisees, strengthening its operations, and proactively improving the business behind the scenes. And a good FSO understands that and builds its process around brands that are genuinely ready for structured growth. So what's the actual benefit of working with the franchise sales organization? And it really comes down to two big things: consistency and focus. Consistency because instead of franchise development happening in bursts, whenever a founder finds a spare hour between everything else, it becomes a structured and ongoing process. Candidates move through clearly defined stages. Follow-ups happen on schedule. Details don't get buried under 100 other emails. And focus because the founder gets to stay focused on the business they actually built. The operations, the culture, the thing that made people want to franchise with them in the first place, instead of spending an entire week on the phone with prospective owners. Now there's a great real-world example of this from one of our brand partners. David Briggs, the founder of Mosquito Shield, talked about his experience being a part of a group of franchise founders who had already faced a lot of the same challenges he was facing. He put it this way. He said, "I got so much out of listening to the other founders." Now, later in that same conversation, he talked about being able to turn around and mentor newer franchise brands himself, sharing what he'd learned so they could prepare for things he didn't have a chance to prepare for, really helping them see around the corner. David said, being able to tell them what was around the corner and help them prepare for things that I didn't have the chance to prepare for. And that's really the idea behind all this. Founders don't have to figure out franchise development entirely on their own. There is real value in learning from people and organizations that have already been through the process of scaling a franchise brand the right way. If you zoom out far enough, and this is really what it all adds up to, since 2017, this approach has helped brands expand into over 5,000 communities and has played a part in more than 1,700 people becoming franchise owners through the brands here at Franchise FastLane. Behind those numbers are founders who grew their business the way they had hoped to, and everyday people who took a real step into ownership because a structured process existed to guide them there. So, to recap, an FSO, a franchise sales organization, helps bring structure and consistency to franchise development as a brand grows. It's not about pushing a sale. It's about managing the process, the conversations, and the follow-ups so growth doesn't come at the cost of everything else that a founder is already responsible for. If this helped clear up what an FSO actually is, do us a favor and hit a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. We put out new videos regularly covering franchise development, franchise sales, and what it actually takes to grow a brand the right way. So go check out the rest of what's on the channel. There's a lot more than just one topic.